Hi, everyone. About 24 years ago, almost to this day, I walked in for my MBA program and took this long train ride from Hyderabad to Ahmedabad. And as I was just entering the campus, I was I was feeling really good about myself because I thought, look, I was one of the 8 people from my engineering college who made it to IMA. I was, I felt that look, I'm on the top of the world. I'm obviously going to top and do extremely well at IMA, etc. So I was really smug in my outlook. And then as I entered my dorm room, I found another another guy who had just checked in there. He basically, the first question he asked me is, he was a chartered accountant who was doing this MBA as well. And his first question to me was, I heard that McKinsey doesn't like chartered accountants. Do you know? And I was immediately stunned. Oh my God, this guy is already thinking of getting placed and getting into McKinsey. And soon it dawned upon me that in the first few weeks and months of being at IMA, I realized that in fact I thought I was the smartest guy in the room, and I knew all the stuff. And I was always thinking, what are these other guys doing here, right? And all these people with non-engineering backgrounds, non-IIT backgrounds, I had this, smug notion about myself that I'm the smartest guy in the room. And soon enough, I figured out that actually, you know what, the perspectives of every single person in the classroom actually are so different, and together that diversity is actually improving the problem solving to a whole new level. I had a very linear, left-brained, deductive reasoning capability. I thought I was very good at that, but I realized that there were so many perspectives from different backgrounds, and the way they were looking at any problem or any case, and the multiple perspectives that are coming in, it just blew my mind that, oh, I thought I was the smartest guy, and no, it's not. Like, we all have this one innate ability, especially all of us who you would consider as successful people, right? Successful people are generally speaking somewhat delusional. They, like my friend who thought getting into McKinsey was his only thing, and and for the next 1 or 2 years, it was always about, okay, if I don't get into if somebody else gets into McKinsey, that's one spot less for me, right? So that was the kind of mindset that some people worked with. The point is that successful people are somewhat delusional. They think very highly of themselves. If you ask a group of people, how many of you are, how many of you think you're above average? 98% of the people raise their hands. 98% people cannot be above average, right? In any group, but that happens. If you ask anyone, are you better than average driver? Again, 90% plus people think they're better than average drivers. And being delusional is somewhat okay, because that somehow drives us to perform better, etc. But what one needs to realize is that what got us here won't get us there, right? All of you have just stepped into a prestigious MBA program. You've all been extraordinarily successful in your careers so far, in your life so far. And you will feel like, look, I have done so many good things, right? And that's why I'm here. But what got you here won't necessarily get you there. And that is the one important thing I would like you to take away from what I'm saying today, because I think one of those elements is crushing your ego, humility, right? I had this huge sense of ego throughout my, sort of college life, etc., thinking that I'm a smart guy. And it only over time, it kept getting more and more advice and more information that, look, I'm not the smartest guy in the room. In fact, being able to work with people who are much smarter than yourself is one way in which you can be successful, right? Now, I will tell you one example of how this in practice. In my final interview after 2 years of campus and MBA, I was being interviewed by Nachiket Moore, one of the leading lights of the financial services industry at that time, and was pitted to be one of the future CEOs of ICICI at the time he was interviewing me. And his question was, he asked me to write a couple of lines of C code, something to do with pointers and so on. And he wanted me to write that. And, I had, while I had done my electrical engineering and all that good stuff, I thought it was 2 years of management. I was a little rusty as far as writing C code was concerned. And then, so I said, you know what, I actually know this, you don't, I mean, don't you trust me? I went to IIT. What do you think? I can write this code. But I was refusing to write that couple of lines of code because actually, frankly, I was a little out of touch. But I also thought, look, this is something I can do. Again, another demonstration of ego, right? And of course, Nachiket, said, he realized that my ego was my issue, and obviously I didn't make it. Of course, I ended up working for ICICI briefly afterwards, but it was that, right? So my sort of one sort of advice to you is control your ego, crush your ego. Life is going to give you a lot of hard knocks, especially if you have a big ego. And one of my experiences through the last 20 years has been, how can you sort of chisel off your ego every single opportunity you get? And the best way to do that is entrepreneurship. Right? Entrepreneurship is an exercise in ego destruction. I've been an entrepreneur now for 20 years, and every single you start entrepreneurship by thinking I'm going to change the world, right? And many people do change the world, but entrepreneurship is not an exercise in ego creation. It's actually an exercise in ego destruction. You might think that I will be my own boss, I'll start something, but what you realize soon enough is that it means that everyone is your boss. Your people who you hire, your investors, your landlord, your spouse, everyone around you, because you are trying to make something happen and you need the support and the help of everyone around you, right? And you slow and slow you realize, and your ego keeps going down. And when, especially it happened to me when we had, sort of a conflict in the setup of Fractal a few years after we started. And when everything was settled, the moment I realized that my ego was a problem and I acknowledged it, that's when we move forward in life. So again, one simple thing for you: control your ego, crush your ego, because one way to be successful in life is through humility, and it's hard to learn, especially for successful people. Okay. Now talking of entrepreneurship, I never thought I would be an entrepreneur. Right? I grew up in a very traditional, or somewhat modern, but upper middle class kind of a family. Father used to work for an oil company, and one of the things that he taught me was there is no such thing as an honest businessman. Honest businessman is an oxymoron in our country, right? And so I thought, I grew up thinking, no, I'm going to get a good job, just build a great career, not going to start a business because I don't want to be corrupt, number one. And number two, you need more capital. You need capital to create capital. So that was my mindset with which I started, my career, right? And it changed a lot, again, during my MBA days. One of the sessions we had, one of the courses that I took, which still is one of the best courses I've ever taken in my management education, was called Business Ethics. It was being taught by a wonderful professor called Dr. Deepthi Bhatnagar, and she had invited Narayan Murthy, Professor N.R. Narayana Murthy was the CEO of Infosys back in, and this was 1997. And Infosys wasn't a very big deal at that time. It had just gone public. It was about 35 to 50, I think it was about $50 million in revenue, not a breathtakingly large company. And but people thought that it's a company that will go places. Of course, it has. In the last 20 years, it's 40 times that size. And so he shared his journey of how he was a very ethical entrepreneur and how he could build a company based on values. I still have a lot of respect for how Infosys as a company has been created. So that actually triggered me towards entrepreneurship. The reason I'm talking about this is that whether you take on entrepreneurship or you don't, ethical leadership is scarce in our country today. Across the globe, it is scarce, but certainly very scarce in our country. And my sort of advice to you is to look at that. And if that's one dimension which will really stand you in good stead over the years. Sometimes ethics can start from saying, you could say, look, if I'm not getting caught, it's okay, right? But my advice to you is to use one simple test, the YouTube test or the newspaper test. If what you're doing right now is published in the newspaper tomorrow, are you going to be comfortable with that or not? Can you live your life knowing that whatever you're doing is being published in the newspapers tomorrow or is as a video on YouTube? Are you okay with that or not? If you're okay with that, that means you're living. If you're not okay with that, it's a serious challenge to sort of go and challenge yourself. Just look at whether this is the right thing or not. Maybe there is some ethical compromises you're making, right? The game of life is not a zero-sum game. it's not a one-off game. The game of life is a game with repetitions, and you'll see from game theory and other kinds of things that you may learn is that in a game that has infinite repetitions or many repetitions, the best strategy is to actually not try to make it zero sum. It's actually to collaborate rather than compete and to beat others. So just think about that. The value of ethical leadership in life is huge, and it is scarce today. It is so scarce that you will actually differentiate yourself if everybody knows that this person, she or he means what she says, she or he is true to their word, they can keep my trust. It's a huge currency to be successful in life. And one of the things of life is to actually extend and receive trust from others. And that can happen only through great ethical leadership. And given it's so scarce, it's actually a differentiator. If you take that up, I will urge you to consider that, yes, we all are capable of making small transgressions, but can you, over time, keep sort of improving, sharpening the saw and getting better and better at ethical leadership of people. And it means that you are able to say what is actually going on without fear of consequences, right? And you are willing to face the hard truth, sometimes a harsh truth. And can you say that, right? It is absolutely differentiating if you can do that. One advice for you is to do that. My third and the last thing I will talk about is about staying hungry and staying smart. And let me explain what that means, right? Half-life of knowledge in our current industry, in every industry today, the age we live in, the half-life of knowledge is 3 years, and it is decreasing. What it means is that, let's say you had an undergrad education before coming to MBA, some of the stuff that you learned is probably already outdated. If not, it will be outdated in the next 5 years. What you learn in the MBA program will also get outdated in less than 5 years. But what will certainly remain is your ability to actually learn more stuff. Your ability and willingness to learn will actually differentiate you. Knowledge can get antiquated and can be obsolete very quickly. But the rate of change of knowledge, if you can actually focus on learning, you can actually be successful, right? So every time you stop learning, right? Every time you tell yourself, look, I know enough now. And many people have that notion that, look, I learned for 20 years, I've been studying, the next 30 years, I just want to practice what I learned. Unfortunately, that world has disappeared. It is about, you have to learn quickly every time. And the moment you give up on learning and think that, look, I'm been there, done that, I don't want to learn more, that's the day decay starts, right? As you're building your career, you have to find whether you want to be an entrepreneur, whether you want to do anything, you have to figure out what is that sweet spot where you can contribute and change the world, right? And for me, that formula is pleasure, meaning, and strength. What you do has to be pleasurable, fundamentally pleasurable. Don't take on any career, job, entrepreneurship, anything which doesn't give you some joy every day, right? It has to give you pleasure. If it is deeply non-pleasurable, you can't really build a career there, right? Sometimes the pleasure can be, you can sort of, you can certainly work towards it, and you can find something interesting after do a few times. But pleasure is important. That's the first dimension. Second dimension is meaning. What you do, you feel like you're changing the world in some meaningful way every day, right? There is something beyond work, right? It's not just going to work and coming back, but what I'm doing is making a difference to the world in some way. And this is completely, it's not a function of the nature of the work. It's completely based on how you interpret what work you do. Like Peter Drucker says that if you ask stone cutters, 3 kinds of stone cutters, what are you doing? One set of stone cutters would say, look, I'm cutting stones. I'm just making a living. The second one would say, look, I'm the best stone cutter in the world, right? I'm trying to get better and better at stone cutting. They have a career orientation. But the third one will say, I'm building a cathedral. They're actually seeing the meaning behind what they're doing. They know the purpose of what they're doing. So you have to find that purpose. It's not no activity per se is purposeful or not purposeful. You have to find that. Like John Milton says, you can make heaven of hell or hell of heaven. It's all in the mind, right? That's what John Milton says in Paradise Lost. Meaning is like that. If you look at somebody like Viktor Frankl, one of the leading thinkers, and one of the people who was unfortunately in one of those concentration camps, he suffered unbelievable tortures. And many people didn't make it. Many people died during those concentration camps, German concentration camps in the Second World War. But he made it through that. He's written a book called A Man's Search for Meaning. It's a wonderful book you should read. But it essentially says that you can derive meaning even out of the most mundane and most, completely hopeless situation that he was in for many years. He could make it because he could see that there was a purpose. He thought, I have a purpose for why I have to live every day. And that's how he made it out. And by the way, he's done so much great work after coming out of it, of the concentration camp as well. So pleasure. So if you picking something, it has to be pleasurable. It has to be meaningful. The third thing is it has to be an area of your strength. It cannot be. You can obviously build strengths, but you have to look at your natural capability and see activities where you feel like you're losing track of time. Right? There are some activities when you do, time just flows by. Right? You just spend 2 hours, 3 hours doing that, and you don't even realize. Whenever that happens to you, you know that that is a place which is your strength, right? You're actually in a state of flow, as Mihai and Csikszentmihalyi writes in this book called Flow. It's just not too easy, not too hard. It's just in the zone where it is enough to challenge you, but not enough to create anxiety. That is where you find your zone of strength. If you find activities as pleasurable, meaningful, and as an area of strength, you can really build a fantastic, happy life, which is what all we want to do, right? This is what we want to do. So how can you be driven for learning? And I said hungry and smart. I mean, how can you be learning? How can you learn and be driven to achieve the impossible and do more? But how do you create pleasure, meaning, and strength? And while you're working, my last point in this is that when you're, the smarts that I talked about is actually emotional smarts. It's about, especially in an MBA program, the moment you come in, like I was telling you about the McKinsey story of my friend, right? The moment you come in, you feel like somebody else's gain is my loss. You can just have that mindset in life, right? But if you can treat other people as people and build on those relationships, you'll really benefit a lot. Many of us think MBA is about teaching you problem solving or teaching you finance or marketing, etc. Yes, all of the above, right? But most importantly, what you will take out from MBA is the relationships that you'll build here. 20 years from now, 25 years from now, who is one phone call away for you? Right? That is what will matter. 10 years from now, 5 years from now. So if you spend the next 2 years building the best relationships on campus with everybody out there, you will come out succeeding in the world of life, because you will have those relationships that you can sort of help out and receive help. I'll end my little talk here by telling you what Steve Jobs said. In his rare interviews, he said that many of us, the conventional wisdom is that live life by the rules, right? Live by the rules. Don't poke around too much, right? But his insight is that this will change the moment you realize that the world as it exists today is made by people just like you and me. They are no smarter or no wiser than we are, right? So the moment you realize that, look, I can change the world, right? It is actually within me. I don't have to take on all the rules that exist there. I can actually build new stuff and change the world in meaningful ways. You realize that other people are no smarter than me, and therefore I can also push and change. You will end up achieving change and actually change the world for the better. I hope many of you here will eventually change the world, and my best wishes to you as you start your MBA journey.